Hello, and welcome to Instant Insights. At GlobalData Strategic Intelligence, we track over 100 tech, industry, ESG, and macro themes impacting all major sectors. I'm Nimrah Sharif, and today I'm joined by Rob Pritchard, Principal Analyst in the tech team, and Christopher Papadopoulos, Principal Analyst in the Strategic Intelligence team here at GD. We'll talk about ESG, how things are changing, and where things are at. So, Rob, you recently published the GlobalData Tech ESG Watch. Can you explain what that is?
Sure. It's what we do is we look to capture and summarize key events and trends in the tech sector on a quarterly basis to do with ESG. Obviously, there's far too much going on to report everything, so we try and select the things which are of most importance and which capture major announcements or pick up on emerging market trends.
Oh, sounds interesting. So, what have been the main trends in tech ESG this last quarter?
Yeah, I guess it's been notable that part of the broader US government's efforts to remove or reduce ESG targets have been keen. And we noticed that two big deals like the Verizon 20 billion acquisition of Frontier and T-Mobile USA's Lumos investment both involve sort of concessions on DEI in order to obtain regulatory approval. So essentially, these companies have had to adopt a sort of more pragmatic approach to realize their sort of wider strategic business goals. And we're interested to see how that carries on with further mergers and acquisitions in future. I suspect for the next few years that's going to be the case of having to put pragmatism ahead of idealism, I guess you might put it. But business is business.
And Chris, did you have anything to add to that?
Oh yeah, only to pick up on some of the things Rob mentioned. So there were these deals where it was the US FCC required some DEI concessions, and I just thought it was so strange because I thought the FCC was this organization which just said, don't say swear words before 9 o'clock or something like that, and it actually, for it to request a kind of a change in a company's internal policy seems to me quite strange, and it's a risky thing to do politically because now the next government who takes over could do that as well. But it's something to watch out for is the US government throwing its weight around like this in terms of how it can affect corporate ESG. So it might do it through these kinds of mechanisms, but it also will probably try and do it as well through procurement and bids for government contracts. If you're bidding for a government contract, they might want to know, look, what policy, what ESG, what DEI policies have you got in place? Because we want them actually to be, we want you to not have those. Usually they want you to have them historically and elsewhere. They want you to kind of have them, but maybe now that's going to change.
That's an interesting point, Chris, because certainly across the EC, we've seen evidence from telecom service providers that ESG initiatives, DEI, are key to many contracts. So there's definitely a divergence going on between the USA administration and the EU at the moment.
It's going to get very difficult to sell things to different people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, what would you guys both think about the other trends that are emerging from what you recently published?
Well, I'd say obviously there's still a constant heartbeat of ESG across tech sectors. Sector, excuse me, tends to lead a lot in ESG issues. But what I've found is we're moving from what we might call a faith-based approach towards a fact-driven one. So rather than ESG being a sort of like a strategic aspiration, it's become sort of like a commercial imperative. So some activities are hard to justify, and so you have to come out there and prove it has a proper impact, just not just on the sort of being nice and doing things well and being a good corporate citizen, but also to prove to investors that it has value. And there's plenty of evidence of that. I mean, for example, if you look at reducing greenhouse gas emissions by using renewables or reducing overall energy consumption, that is both good for the planet and also for the bottom line. So that that's the new way of things at the moment. And that does stretch beyond just the USA. I mean, I know we've got a strange situation with the government in the States at the moment, but also I think it's a commercial imperative that's sort of moving on with the latest sort of iteration of how people address ESG. So I don't know. I mean, there are studies that also show that many investors, even some of the more hard-nosed ones, are still complying and wanting ESG instruments. And there's certainly evidence where, for example, Gen Z talent will place commitment to good corporate performance and behavior ahead of their salary. I'm glad they can afford it. So there's a range of things going on. It's just a new reality. I don't know, Chris, if you find that sort of spreading across the broader ESG market as well.
I think so. I think there's a lot of challenges at the sort of board and strategy level and at the policy level as well, especially in tech with, if you think about data centers and increasing power
Mm.
demands, but then you think also a lot of these companies have very ambitious decarbonization targets. Then you think you've got a US government which wants to kind of reshore and build US production capabilities. But then that doesn't count for renewables. But then if you don't do that, then all the renewables and the green energy technology gets imported from China. There's all these
Yeah.
very strange sort of trade-offs and contradictions going on at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, part of that sort of commercial imperative that's coming through. I mean, to be fair, largely driven by the shake-up from what's happening in the States. But so people become more sort of commercially realistic about ESG and tech. But equally, the problem is you've got these sort of long-term targets, and then you've got immediate challenges. What we found recently, looking at the things that telcos and IT and tech companies are doing, they tend to be incremental in their impact on the environment. I mean, as you mentioned, the AI boom is a massive challenge. So you've got to try and balance that against your long-term targets and your short-term commercial imperatives. So it's an interesting time. I think the direction of travel is clear. It's just as there seems to be a lot of bumps in the road as it stands.
Great stuff. Sounds very insightful. So, moving on, looking globally and not just at the tech sector, Chris, you just published the ESG Executive Briefing, a quarterly analysis of the ESG trends impacting the corporate world. So in 2025, there is pressure on companies to be more transparent about their ESG credentials, but also recent developments like tariffs have created downside risks for the development and adoption of energy transition technologies in the US. Can you expand on this a little bit?
Yep. So the what's going on with US policy is you had these tariffs and you've also had some rollbacks in the various tax credits that the Biden government had introduced on low carbon and clean technologies. And this has done sort of two things. One is it makes it less profitable to invest in, developing those technologies. But the second big impact is done is just take away, corporate bandwidth from ESG. Like ESG, there's been so many curveballs this year that I don't think as many people aren't paying as close attention to ESG. They're trying to juggle so many other problems and challenges. The challenge they're going to have over the longer term is that the kind of ESG regulatory creep is going to continue. And it's in two sort of key categories. One is in mandatory disclosures, which is being introduced everywhere except for the US, except maybe some US states. It's still going forward. There was a bit of an adjustment in Europe, but that's all still going ahead. And then the other kind of pillar of regulation, which people aren't really looking out for as much as they were last year, is carbon pricing. So
Mm.
China, the EU, the UK as well, they're all sort of introducing and making more stringent their carbon pricing policies. And the International Maritime Organization reached an agreement this year for a carbon pricing framework for international shipping as well. So there's these two kind of regulatory undercurrents which haven't gone
Mm.
away and are still progressing, but companies are distracted from them by these other things going on.
Sounds interesting. And Chris, in the report you went through the recent developments in ESG regulation and standards. What is the current situation?
Oh, so the current situation, if I was to summarize it, is this. So there were lots of changes. Almost all the low carbon technology tax credits introduced in the Inflation Reduction Act have either been will be phased out at the end of this year or in the coming years. The only one that survived was one for carbon capture. I think that was the only one that survived, which also applies to something called direct air capture as well. Not all super bad. And then in the EU, you had something called the EU Omnibus. So the EU was just introducing lots of different regulations all at once. And there was a bit of there was some sort of moans and groans from the political and corporate world, and so some of that's been sort of pared back in terms of who it's going to impact, and those impacted, what are they going to have to do?
Great. And so, Rob, looking at the tech sector and following on from Chris's insights, do you have any examples of incremental improvements companies have been making?
Yeah, I mean, I think things are still going in the right direction. It's just less overt, maybe sometimes for pragmatic and political purposes. But equally, you look at certain areas like the EU, then it's still very important. It's on the table and being supported. So, pretty much all service providers are looking to reduce their carbon impact, and also tech vendors. So, you look at, I mean, NVIDIA chips or whatever for AI. They're driving up data center requirements, but each generation is getting more efficient, even if it's a little bit more demanding. So this is part of the balance people are trying to strike between the progress of technology and the necessity to keep within the rules, regulations, and capabilities. Because at the moment, the amount of energy and water being used is already on the radar, and it's likely to become a political issue and geopolitical, and it's going to be talked about because if suddenly you can't get water or electricity because someone's built a data center next door, you're not going to be happy. So those are going on, and then in terms of specific examples, we sort of came up with in the ESG Watch last quarter review. We had Telefonica Tech, which is the sort of advanced services arm of the Spanish former incumbent. They had lighting solutions that actually use AI, and that can save up to 30% in energy usage. And then you've got something like Sparkle, which used to be part of Telecom Italia, where they're recycling their subsea cables. It's a sort of indirect way of saving on CO2 because they can be repurposed. And they reckon that secondary manufacturing reuse will save more than 35,000 tons of CO2. Then you got people like KPN, who have signed up with Europe's largest solar farm provider to get energy to run their networks. And I guess the other one is BT announcing what they say is the biggest ever electric vehicle fleet purchase. So they're replacing their traditional vehicles with EVs across a number of manufacturers. So, this is part of the incremental stuff that I mentioned earlier. Nothing's going to blow the whole thing out of the water, but everyone is making progress. There are challenges, particularly in areas like supporting data centers, hyperscalers, AI, but equally AI can be part of the solution as well. So it's progress, and it's always evolving. It's always fascinating.
That's great. Sounds like a lot that's going on. And just as you're already speaking, Rob, so what do you think is next?
To be honest, more of the same. We're in a situation where people are being pragmatic. We've got a strange geopolitical or sort of situation we're working with. There will always be a commitment, as far as I can tell, from most tech companies towards ESG. They recognize the benefits of having a diverse workforce. They recognize the benefits to customers, investors, and to attract talent in terms of being sustainable and to the planet, obviously. So, I mean, there's nothing absolutely massive happening, but it'll be incremental. And it all makes COP30 quite interesting, come up in November, I believe it is, in Brazil. See what comes out there, because the last two COPs have been rather pathetic, whereas the one before that was useful and interesting and made progress. So I guess that's the sort of the one to keep in mind. And the other thing to keep in mind is we've got an ESG webinar in tech coming up on 3rd of July. So if anyone's interested in that, please sign up as well. That's
Nice
probably
little plug.
the main event.
Nice little plug there, Rob.
Thank you.
And Chris, what do you think is next?
Well, what we're keeping an eye on is we're still looking out for how green technologies are progressing. We think this issue about the US EU divergence in terms of the corporate pushback against ESG is something that's gonna be interesting as it plays out, and whether companies in straddling both markets will have to present themselves as two different companies,
Mm.
and how companies are going to navigate that. So that's something we're keeping an eye on, but we'll keep an eye on as well whether the new US administration is going to, it changes its attention quite a lot. So it focuses on different topics, and changes quite rapidly. So we have to keep an eye on whether it turns its attention to again to this, to corporate ESG, and whether there's more sort of pushbacks and things like that.
Oh, thank you both, Rob and Chris, for those instant insights. Thanks for listening, everyone. And from us in Strategic Intelligence, see you next time.